You remember, not because you want to, but because your body still carries marks that have no shape. They weigh, they throb, they slide through your joints as if they were just fatigue. But it's memory. It's the invisible trying to be seen. It was a simple night, simple for anyone watching from the outside. Just another typical night, one of those when the house needs order, and you try to convince yourself that everything is fine, that it's just another tough day. Just one more. You filled the bucket with water, soap, and before you even realized it, the first tear fell before the first rag was wrung out. It wasn't a performance, it was a leak. It was your body confessing before your mind caught up. You knew it hurt, but only there, kneeling with the cold floor pressing against your knee bones, did you realize that something had been wrong for a long time. You were mopping the floor of a house where no one noticed your presence, and you did it with your exhausted soul, like someone begging to be useful, to be noticed, to not be replaced. But nobody noticed, not even him. And in that domestic silence, between the sound of the rag being wrung out and the echo of your muffled sobs, you realized you were cleaning what no longer belonged to you. That house didn't embrace you. That body didn't seek you out. That presence didn't fill you up. But you stayed. You stayed because you were taught to be strong. You stayed because you were convinced that love is about endurance. You stayed because every time you tried to leave, guilt came along with the appearance of a promise, and you gave in. You believed it was still possible to save it. That if you cleaned one more time, if you silenced yourself just a little longer, maybe he would see. Maybe he would notice. But he didn't notice, because it wasn't about you. It was about him. It always was. About his comfort, his space, the emotionally tidy world he inhabited while you disintegrated in the corners, and that was the night. The night the rag became a symbol. You noticed that you were mopping the floor as if trying to wash yourself clean, as if trying to scrub the guilt from your body, the longing, the shame of not being enough for the one you just wanted to love. And it was there, kneeling down, that your soul screamed silently, "I don't want to crawl for love anymore." It was the first time that phrase emerged within you with such intensity, and it hit like thunder, silent on the outside, but devastating on the inside. Because in that moment, you didn't know whether to stand up or to stay right there, waiting for the pain to do the rest. Have you ever been through this? Tell me in the comments. The shame of realizing you felt small within something you built yourself. Isn't it strange? How can someone be so big in another person's heart, yet feel so small in their own life? You gave your all. You cared. You compromised. You listened. You understood. And deep down, you lost yourself too. You lost little pieces of yourself with every silence he used to punish you, with every phrase that downplayed your pain, with every "you're overreacting" he threw out when your soul was crying for acknowledgement. You noticed it, but you acted like you didn't, because loving has always been easier than facing yourself. And you carried old fears, fears that didn't even start with him, fears of abandonment, of rejection, of failure, of not being enough, fear of repeating stories you swore you'd never live. But when you realized, you were already kneeling on a dirty floor, crying softly so you wouldn't disturb anyone. This is the part no one talks about, the part that gets left out of the pretty pictures, of the blessed relationship you posted together. You cried while mopping the floor. He smiled on social media. You went to bed with swollen eyes. He said it was all in your head. You searched for signs of hope. He gave short answers. And even so, you blamed yourself, as if you had done something wrong, as if it had been something wrong. That's when the cruelest part began. The love you felt became a source of shame. You started to hide, to fall silent, to accept. And the more you accepted, the more he believed he could keep going. But that night, the one when you were scrubbing the floor while crying, the cycle cracked. It was subtle, but real. A realization crossed your mind. The filth of your pain never bothered him, because he never had to clean it up. He never needed to understand your fears. He never stopped to listen to what you needed. He never was willing to help you carry the invisible. You were carrying it alone. And now, even your body couldn't take it anymore. When pain begins to lose its power to control you, there comes a point when pain gets tired of hurting, and it turns into something else, a kind of decision. That's what you felt that night. It wasn't outrage, it wasn't anger. It was a sacred exhaustion, a limit. You looked at the wet floor, at the dirty rag in your hands, and realized that was a symbol. That represented everything you had been trying to uphold by yourself. A relationship that no longer existed, a love that wouldn't communicate, a presence that no longer chose you. And still, you stayed, out of fear of leaving. Do you realize that now? We cling more to the fear of the unknown than to the beauty of what's here. You didn't know what your life would be like without him. But in that moment, you began to suspect that maybe it would be better than continuing to fade away. Yes, that realization was still subtle, but it was new, and new enough to spark movement. It may not have been a decision at that instant, but it was the beginning of a choice. You were still crying, but you no longer cried the same way. It was no longer just sadness, it was rupture. It was the internal womb of your courage beginning to move. And maybe for the first time you started to realize that the cold floor was no longer your place. He never saw you, but you can see yourself now. You may not want to hear this yet, but I need to tell you, he never saw you. He noticed your effort, but he didn't care. He saw your attempts, but he didn't value them. He knew you were giving yourself completely, but he thought it was your obligation, because for him, your love has always been convenient, but you weren't made to be anyone's convenience. You were made to be a home, a soul, a presence, but you need to be this first for yourself. That night, the floor washed away more than just the house. It washed away the end of a lie you were carrying. The lie that being loved means you must humiliate yourself. You realized, even without words, that it wasn't love, it was attachment. It was old pain disguised as affection. It was fear masquerading as loyalty. And that's why you kept going. Because you believed that to love is to not give up. But what about when true love is the one that takes you away? Takes you away from the place where you forgot yourself, rescues you from the ground where you buried your desires, brings you back inside yourself. If this resonates with you, comment, I needed to hear that. You might be broken, but you are waking up. Now, breathe. I know it's heavy, but something sacred is happening within you. You are not just remembering a difficult night. You are accessing the exact point where your transformation began. It was on that floor, with your knees bruised, that you began to awaken. Not because he changed, but because you got tired of deceiving yourself. And this is a miracle. It's the kind of realization that shifts paths. It doesn't happen out loud. It doesn't need an audience. It is born in the silence of an exhausted soul that can no longer beg for scraps, and that finally decides to stop crawling. Because it realizes that if it stays there will be nothing left. You remember that night, but now with different eyes, and perhaps you're ready to start over. Not from the beginning, but from a new point. The point where pain no longer controls you. Comment a heart if you're on this journey together. Something has shifted within you, even if it wasn't clear, even if you are still scared, even if you still feel loss. His absence still weighs on you, but not with the same force, because now there's something stronger inside you, the awareness of what you no longer deserve to carry. And this didn't come from advice, not from a video, not from a pretty phrase. It came from that night, from that scene, from that floor, from the pain that washed over your face more than any cloth ever could. There, amidst soap and silence, you realized how far you had gone, how much you had endured, how much you kept quiet, and how much you made it seem like everything was okay, but it wasn't. It never was. You only learned to camouflage, to adapt, to mold yourself to what the other offered, even if it was little, because you thought that was love. You thought love meant adapting to the other until you fit into their life. But what about yours? Who adjusted anything for you? Who stopped to notice your silences? Who asked if you wanted it too? Who knelt down on the floor with you and said, you don't have to go through this alone? No one. And that's why now, the longing you feel for him began to compete for space with the longing you feel for yourself. The time when you believed love meant persistence. Do you remember how many times you tried to make it work? How many times did you say, it's just a phase, he's stressed, I make mistakes too, maybe I'm asking too much? How many times did you deny your own pain? Because loving someone who doesn't love you back the same way distorts your perception. It makes you start to believe the fault is yours. And you began to act like this, apologizing for feeling, asking for permission to exist, begging for crumbs with a starving soul. But that's not love. That's emotional survival. You put yourself last, and still smiled. You did everything, and still heard, you're always complaining. You swallowed your tears, and still tried to be sexy in bed. You offered support, and received silence. You were available. And he said, you're too intense. But the truth is that he only knew how to love those who didn't need love. He wanted someone easy, someone who wouldn't require depth, someone who would fit on the surface where he lives. And you weren't meant to live shallowly. You want presence, eye to eye, whole body, open mind, affection that commits. You want someone to notice when you're falling, not someone who says, "Go ahead, figure it out." But for a long time you accepted less, because you were afraid of ending up with nothing. And that fear was the invisible chain that held you for years. When the absence starts to show you that the presence was illusory, he was there. Physically, yes, but emotionally. You realize now, he hadn't really been there for a long time. He became a presence that made you feel alone. And this is the cruelest kind of loneliness, the kind that exists even when the other person is by your side. You slept with him but woke up with an empty soul. You talked but you weren't heard. You asked, but your needs were ignored. You cried and he said, "It will pass, you're strong." He confused coldness with maturity, and you confused inattention with distraction. Deep down, you thought he just needed time. But today you realize he never wanted time, he wanted distance, because he always knew you were beyond his emotional capacity. He knew you deserved more, but he wasn't going to say that. He preferred to belittle you, make you doubt your sensitivity, turn you into dramatic, too much, difficult, because it was easier to blame you than to admit his own inability to love. And you stayed. You stayed trying to convince yourself that you could improve. You stayed trying not to be too sensitive. I stayed trying to be light, to fit into a place where you were no longer seen. But today, you realize you weren't born to fit. You were born to overflow. The realization starts to rebuild your identity, and this is where everything changes, because you begin to see yourself differently, not as the one who was rejected, but as the one who is awakening. You start to remember who you were before the pain, before the fear, before the desperate attempts to be enough. You remember your light, your spontaneous laughter, your will to live, the way you loved with your whole body. You were all of that. And little by little you silenced yourself. But now something inside you has awakened, and there's no turning back. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't shrink yourself to fit into a relationship that doesn't honor you. And maybe you still think, "But I loved him." Yes, you loved. But now you love something even deeper, yourself, at peace. And peace is priceless. There's no negotiating, there are no shortcuts. Peace comes after the storm that strips away what can no longer support you. And it was that night, in that silent scene between tears and a wet floor, that the storm arrived. It shattered an illusion, but it returned your vision, the beginning of a return, from you to you. You didn't leave the house the next day. You didn't throw away his things. You didn't create a scene. You didn't need to, because the greatest rupture had already happened within you. It was invisible, but profound, irreversible. You started to see yourself, and when you see yourself, when you truly recognize yourself, when you honestly acknowledge your own pain, there's no more pretending that everything is fine. You still cry, but you no longer cry for him. You cry for everything you didn't receive, for everything you forced yourself to endure, for everything you silently bore. But now that cry has a different color. It cleanses, it heals, it awakens. Have you been through this? Tell me in the comments. And little by little, without needing to make big decisions, you start returning to yourself. You go back to eating the way you like. You go back to listening to the songs you stopped hearing because he thought they were sappy. You go back to talking with friends you distanced yourself from because he took issue with them. You go back to looking at yourself in the mirror without apologizing to the reflected image. You return, little by little, with fear, with doubts. But you return, because you realize that your absence from yourself hurt more than his absence. And it's the biggest awakening of your life. It's not about revenge, it's about truth. You don't want him to suffer. You don't want to get back at him. You don't want to prove anything, because you've already understood he lives in a place where you no longer fit. You've grown, you've awakened, you've realized, and now you can't love someone who demands that you shrink yourself. It's no longer about him. It's about you, about your body that's tired of bearing the invisible, about your heart that won't accept being silenced anymore, about your soul that's coming back home. And the path is just that, intimate, silent, slow. You will stumble. You will miss things. You will want to go back sometimes, but you won't go back because now you know. The love you deserve won't leave you cleaning the floors in tears. You've made it this far, and that's no small feat.